1-800-CALLACT. Listen, I'm good for the money. I promise you I'm good for the money. I'm just a little strapped right now. I literally live in the back of my truck bed camper right now. All I've got's $2,000 and I'm just trying to get a hold of some reliable transportation with full suspension, maybe some big fat tires and enough battery to get me to and from work. And I just don't think I can do that for under $2,000. I just need to... Hold on. Hold on, I'm gonna call you back. I'm Chris, behind the camera is Elizabeth, and right in front of you is an Eskute Spark Y. To our surprise, this bike has been really awesome. We've been holding this review off. We currently live in California and we just moved from North Carolina to really put this bike kind of through the ringer for the last month or so. And we've got a lot of miles on it now, so I think we can get a good review. But first, let's go over the specs of this thing. This thing weighs 79 pounds. It is a fat-tired e-bike with a 750 watt Soto motor, which is a subsidiary of Bafang. Bafang actually produces these motors, and I don't know why, but they brand some of them Soto. So it's 750 watt continuous power, and it peaks to, they claim, 1500 watt. I don't have any way to test that, but it does climb the hills very good. And the cool thing about the Spark Y, which a lot of bikes don't have, and we've been beating ourselves to death on some of these trails on our other bike that has no suspension, is this has full suspension. It has 100mm forks up front, and also has a rear air shock back here in the back. This thing is so cushy in combination with these comically large monster truck sized tires. They advertise these at 4.8 inch width tires, 26 by 4.8. The tires that are actually on here are 4.9s. So these are gigantic tires. And when you put these super squishy tires in combination with this super squishy seat, the air fork in the back and the front suspension up front, this thing, it's almost like riding a motorcycle. It just eats up everything. It's very similar to the CRF 300L motorcycle that we ride in the way that it just eats up everything. These have hydraulic disc brakes, which is really nice at a bike under $2,000. However, I don't know the brand. They are model XD MT800s. They're 160mm rotors, and though they're not stamped with any real notable brand, they've been awesome for the time we've had it. We've been using them on pavement here in the campground and all over these dusty mountain roads, and so these brakes have been awesome, and they don't squeak either, which is really nice. They're nice and quiet brakes. The battery is a 48-volt, 20-amp-hour lithium-ion battery, and it has LG and Samsung cells. So again, it's nice that it doesn't use no-name cells. I would much rather have name brand cells in my battery than I would have a name brand stamp on the side of my brakes in an e-bike. You know, these brakes aren't really going to catch on fire. They work just fine, but in something more complex like the battery, I'm glad that in the budget, you know, this is built to a budget sub 2,000, that they do use LG and Samsung cells in the battery. They claim with this battery and the 750 watt motor that it'll do 40 miles on throttle only. I don't have a good way to test that because everywhere where we ride has been loose sand. It's been pulling a bike trailer with a dog in it. Almost everywhere this thing's ever been ridden has been on pretty steep hills. So I'm not sure about that 40-mile range, but it does have good battery range. You do get a big bright headlight up front, a big LED headlight up front, but in the back, it's a little chintzy. You just get a battery powered light back here that you have to come back here and click on when you want to ride at night, which some bikes that's wired into the actual main battery. But here it's just a little bit chintzy, but you're on a budget. You do have a Shimano gear set that is name branded, and then you have 7 speeds, which has been more than plenty for us. On these e-bikes with these 750 watt, 1500 peak motors, you're almost never in low gear. I keep this thing usually in a taller gear so that I can help it because you get so much help from the motor. So we leave it in high gear most of the time. You do get these cool bolt-on grips, which I always prefer over the slide-on grips. On the other bike we have right now, it's kind of frustrating. The grips just slide on, and as you're riding, they're constantly moving around. I love these grips, and anytime you want to replace them, you just loosen these 2 little hex bolts, take them off, and put new grips on. And there's no glue, there's no razor blades involved, nothing silly, no hairspray involved. You also get this cool little charger down here, which I didn't realize was a feature until earlier today, and I tested it. It's a USB-C, and I hooked the phone into it, and it does charge a phone. So if you did have a handlebar mounted phone holder, you could charge your phone from your main battery as you're going, which I think is super cool if you're actually using this as a commuter bike, or maybe you had an auxiliary light or something else, but you have USB-C power down there, which is super cool. At first when I looked at it, I thought it was USB micro, and I was very pleasantly surprised that a USB-C is hiding in there. You do get a 3 amp 54.6 volt fast charger, so the charge time from dead is about 4 to 5 hours, which is pretty good. It's in a 3 amp charger. A lot of companies put a 2 amp charger in the box, so that is cool. They did not cheap out there. The weight capacity for this is 400 pounds, which is pretty high because it's not really meant to be a cargo bike, although it does have, back here, it does have some bosses already threaded for a cargo rack. I know on the non-rear suspension model of this, the Spark X, it comes with it does come with a cargo rack that bolts in here. It's just with the Spark Y, it does not come included, but it is pre-threaded here for those if you ever wanted to do it. And you can see down here, we have fitted the bike trailer onto this and have been pulling it around a lot, and it's done awesome. So I think right now we're gonna do what this bike's meant to do, not sit in a parking lot, and we're gonna go hit the mountains and see how it does up there. Good girl. That's sweet girl. That's a good girl. All right, so we got Mona loaded up on our Eskute Spark Y here, but we also wanted to take the time to show this off. This is a Eskute helmet. They just were kind enough to send Elizabeth and myself each one of these helmets. We actually just got these in, so we're kind of reviewing these and checking these out for a while. They were kind enough to send us some, and they're super cool, and they actually pass NTA 8776, which is a Dutch standard for e-bikes or for faster things than just a regular bicycle. So these are rated to 28 miles an hour, which regular bicycle helmets are not rated to 28 miles an hour. They also come with these cool removable visors, so it's like you're wearing a hat. And if we stay too late tonight and it becomes dark, they also have lights on the helmet, on the front and on the back, and it'll do multiple patterns. My favorite is the Night Rider. But my favorite thing is they look cool. A lot of bike helmets look super dorky. I'm dorky enough as it is. I'm a white guy with a bicycle with a dog in a basket. I'm at peak dork, so if I can have something to make me look a little bit cooler, anything that helps. All right, you ready, good girl? Oh boy. Oh yeah, this is an e-bike. I'm gonna turn it on and use it as an e-bike. Way better. Way better as an e-bike, pulling a dog on a trailer with giant monster truck tires. Those are very hard to pedal without the e-assist. And then you add a dog into the back of it. And then this steep hill we're getting ready to go up. You good girl. All right, we've taken a break here. Let Mona stretch her legs on this beautiful vista. Now let's go over some pros and cons of the Eskute Spark Y. Let's start positive. Spark Y. These big tires are awesome. If your motor was to die though, that would be a con. These would immediately turn into a con. Trying to pedal with these 4.9 inch wide, 26 inch tall tires just would destroy your quads pretty quickly. I've messed around with it, just pedaling it without any of the e-assist, and it's doable, but it is gonna be a workout. Another pro is how soft it rides. It's only 100 millimeter travel on this fork, but it's plenty for this style of bike. You know, you're not sending this bike, you're not gonna take this bike up to Whistler and you know, do a big downhill off-road course at Whistler or anything like that. The motor is pretty powerful. The weird thing about it though is it starts ramping up its power, you know, after about 5 or 6 miles an hour. But once that happens, it sends all the power. And they say 1500 watts peak, and I believe it. And the reason I believe it is because if you're hitting that 1500 peak a lot, you will overheat the controller and this thing will throw a code, and it just kind of turns into a regular bike for a little while until it cools down. It throws an E4 code, and that code can mean a lot of things, but we've come to believe it's just overheating it. So if you're just riding it like a motorcycle and hitting that peak power on this thing all the time, you will overheat it without using any pedal assist or anything like that. Some of the cons that we've noticed is this is a cadence sensor on this thing, so it's not a torque sensor. And some cadence sensors are pretty good and some are pretty bad. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give this cadence sensor like a 4 or a 5 maybe. It takes almost 2 full revolutions of the pedals before the cadence kicks in. And that doesn't sound terrible until you're on like a steep side of a hill, like we were trying to come up a steep bank the other day. And with these big tires, if it's really steep, you're trying to get the bike to move, and it's really difficult with, you know, it weighs 80 pounds and has these big tires, and you don't get any e-assist until there's 2 full revolutions of the pedals. So if it's really steep and you're lighter like Elizabeth, who weighs almost the same thing as this bike does, when you're trying to get those 2 full revolutions of the pedals, you can't maintain enough forward momentum on the bike to get balance before you have to put your foot down. But so you can't ever get enough forward momentum before the bike gives you e-assist. So that can be very frustrating. The other thing is with the e-assist, I wish it was tuned a little bit better. So an e-assist level 1 here, it wants to do 13 miles an hour, 14 miles an hour. So on this real bumpy road that we're on right now with her in the dog cart, I would prefer to be doing like 8 miles an hour or 10 in some parts. And it wants to do 13, 14. It kind of becomes a hindrance again, because a torque sensor would sense I'm not pedaling very hard and wouldn't give me any more power. You can have it in whatever gear you want, and I'll put it in a real high gear and it doesn't even matter, because, you know, it just senses the revolutions of the pedals and it wants to give it power. So it's hard to use the bike anything below like, you know, 13, 14, 15 miles an hour, which doesn't become apparent until you're on some like technical stuff, or maybe you're pulling a trailer or something and you got your kids in a cart or something like that. So I would ding it for the cadence sensor. Probably could be tuned a little bit better. It draws enough power where it can overheat itself, which is, it never happened to Elizabeth. She weighs about 50 less pounds than I do. I'm about 185 and she's about 125. And it hasn't overheated with her. But with me, it will overheat if I just push it with the throttle consistently. It will overheat, especially out here. It's 95 degrees, but it definitely does when the other bike is not. I will say the brakes are good. A lot of people I've seen on e-bike reviews, if it doesn't have 180 millimeter rotors, that, you know, it's not good enough, or if the brakes don't have some big name brand, they're not good enough. But this is an 80-pound bike. You know, I weigh 180, 185. And then we have Mona back here. She weighs 50 on a bike trailer, and we just came down some really steep grades, and the brakes never made any sound. They'll lock up whenever you want them to. They feel really strong. They don't fade. I haven't noticed any real brake fade. Which is really impressive, because we use this a lot pulling a trailer and a lot of weight in it. So even though the brakes are only 160 millimeter, they're awesome. And when it's not hooked to the trailer and you're not doing anything like that, and you just want to throw your Eskute helmet on and go have some fun, this is the bike that I go to. These big squishy tires, front and rear suspension. I drop the seat down to where you can like play around and try to jump stuff. And this bike is way more fun than something like a cargo bike with no suspension. Practicality, the cargo bike would beat it. Something like this KBO Ranger. But if I was riding on this road with all these baseball-sized boulders, this thing is a dream. Where that KBO, you're just going to rattle the fillings out of your teeth. This thing, you just coast over them. You can maintain a pace, probably double or triple the pace on this bike that you can on that KBO, because it's a completely rigid suspension system. No suspension on that bike. With this front and rear suspension and these massive 4.9-inch monster truck tires, it just soaks everything up. I think we're going to switch over and let Elizabeth be in front of the camera for a little while and show off her cool Eskute helmet and see how she likes this bike. We might even unhook the dog trailer from it so she can just have fun on it and see what she thinks.
Now, what do I think about this bike? I prefer this because of the suspension. It makes everything so much more comfortable. I don't have a background in mountain biking, or really, I mean, I know how to ride a bicycle, but doesn't mean I'm good at it. So this suspension makes me feel more comfortable over all of those bumps and potholes, whether or not you're on broken asphalt or off-road. It makes the ride smoother. These big tires absorb so much and make me feel like I'm a little more balanced. When I ride some of the other bikes that we have with these smaller tires, the front feels very squirrely, and for somebody that doesn't have an extensive bicycle background, I don't like the squirreliness. I feel like, you know, if I turn sharp one way, it's gonna throw me. This is bigger. It's just more comfortable. And Chris prefers the throttle on the other one. I actually love the thumb throttle. I think it's easier, especially for filming purposes when I'm only riding with one hand. The thumb throttle is so much easier for me to manage because it's just an up and down mechanism with one thumb as opposed to twisting my whole wrist. Mona, however, has no preference for either bike. Anything with wheels that means that we're going somewhere and she gets to tag along, she loves it. Scooters, e-bikes, motorcycles, cars, doesn't matter. And as Chris mentioned, with the 2-pedal delay before the e-assist kicks in, that would be a downside to this bike for me personally as well, but this thumb throttle really does help with that. You can actually use the thumb throttle to get going and then switch over to the e-assist pedal mode. So I get around it and it makes it a lot easier. Overall, we love this bike. There's only a few cons, otherwise it's a great addition to our adventures here on this channel, and it has gotten us to some rough places and will take us to more rough places. So thank you, Eskute, for letting us review and test out this bike. It's been amazing, and we'll look forward to using this on our next adventure.